Now that Crocodile has returned to being an extremely prominent figure in the story and one of the most important characters in the world, it's time to take a look back at his stint as the first great One Piece villain, and I would personally argue that to date, Crocodile is still the greatest arc boss that One Piece has ever had, completely revamping the stakes of what One Piece conflicts could be, being arguably the most competent and effective villain we've ever had, having the most personally antagonistic relationship with Luffy out of any of his other opponents, and still having some meaningful depth to his character that has actually only continued to develop the further we've gone in the series. So allow me to refresh your memories on what a phenomenal and game-changing villain Crocodile was, to give him the proper respect he deserves before he takes the stage in the modern day narrative again. So before we get into it, make sure to subscribe for more One Piece content every week. And I want to know, do you hate cooking? Do you hate grocery shopping? Do you hate planning meals? Do you hate doing work in general? If so, then you should be using HelloFresh. HelloFresh is the meal prep service that delivers food straight to your door, giving you all the ingredients you need to quickly whip up a delicious meal with easy to follow recipes that can be done in 15 minutes. That means no more time wasted going to grocery stores, no more stress of spending an hour cooking after a long day of work. HelloFresh makes everything simple, and the best part is that it also tastes really, really good. HelloFresh is now offering some great fall flavors with fresh produce straight from the farm to your door in less than a week. Not to mention, HelloFresh is really healthy and genuinely good for you. I know that HelloFresh's fit and wholesome meal plan has helped me stay in shape this summer. And the best part is you can get 16 free meals across 7 boxes if you order today. Just go to HelloFresh.com and use code MrMorge16 for 16 free meals across 7 boxes and 3 free gifts. That's HelloFresh.com, MrMorge16 for 16 free meals across 7 boxes and 3 free gifts. Link in the description below. So to begin with, let me make a quick distinction, which is that while Doflamingo is probably a more developed and well-written character than Crocodile, I'm saying Crocodile has a case for being a better villain, which is a different discussion. I'm also not talking about characters like Blackbeard and Akainu in this video, as I'm only measuring Crocodile by the standards of established arc villains that have had their time to shine in the story as the primary antagonists of a given arc. So to begin with, context matters a lot. It's been a long time since most of us have read One Piece from start to finish, but when you're reading the full story and getting the natural progressive development of the narrative, I think you'll find that Crocodile's introduction into the story had an impact relative to its time that I think no other villain until Kaido really matched. And I'm not talking about Crocodile's literal introduction. I'm talking about the moment that he was established conceptually as a future looming obstacle that the Straw Hats must overcome. Because for the entirety of East Blue, for its first 100 chapters, One Piece didn't really have any iconic villains. Sure, Buggy is iconic now for comedic reasons, but in terms of actual bona fide bad guys, East Blue was pretty much a villain of the week setup, with the Straw Hats generally coming across small-time enemies with pretty simplistic motivations, and the stakes usually amounted to just saving a village or a small town or something, which they would do in about 10 or 20 chapters and then move on. However, at the same time, we were being teased with this idea of the Grand Line, the pirates' graveyard where all the real big shots were, where the real legend would begin, where everything would change. There was a lot riding on the Straw Hats' entrance to the Grand Line, and Oda could not have delivered better than he did with Crocodile. One villain that immediately threw everything that we had gotten used to out the window and drastically revamped how One Piece's storytelling would function from here on. For the first time, we had to deal with an enemy with countless thousands of subordinates, casting a wide net spanning numerous islands across the Grand Line. Crocodile wasn't just a small single island villain, he was a genuine looming final boss that the Straw Hats would have to fight their way to get to, facing numerous trials against his top agents across multiple arcs, just to finally get to the big bad himself. And Crocodile himself completely changed the stakes of what a One Piece conflict could be. Here was a villain with a legitimately grand plan, threatening not just a little town or village, but a gigantic nation of millions of people, orchestrating a civil war that is, to date, larger than the Marineford or Wano Wars in terms of sheer numbers. And Alabasta itself is actually still the largest country the Straw Hats have ever been to by a big margin. And this turns out to be just the tip of the iceberg, as Crocodile is aiming not just to seize control of this giant nation, but to get his hands on an ancient weapon that would allow him to threaten the entire world. And most importantly was the scale of the story itself, building up to Crocodile over multiple arcs, with the entire storyline to take down Crocodile being longer than the time it took to defeat all of the prior East Blue villains combined. I promise, rereading the early parts of One Piece, it is an absolutely staggering leap in storytelling, going from Arlong and Nami's little village to taking on Crocodile and his gigantic Baroque Works organization, the massive civil war, a weapon of world domination, in this unprecedented 100+ chapter epic. Essentially, the impact Crocodile had on changing how One Piece's storytelling worked is pretty much only surpassed by Kaido, who of course set us on a much longer storyline with an unprecedented setup of multiple sagas of build-up to defeat him. But really where Crocodile truly shines is in the threat that he posed. Crocodile is, to date, undeniably the most effective and difficult to deal with threat the Straw Hats have ever faced. Because he was really the complete package, not just in combat strength, but across the board. His planning, his composure, his control over seemingly every situation and problem that arose, and most importantly, in just how close he got to actually achieving his goals. In combat strength, I think there's not much that needs to be elaborated on. Crocodile has the honor of being the first villain to defeat Luffy, which again scores high points for the impact it had at the time as being unprecedented. And it wasn't just that he beat Luffy, but the manner in which he did it, which made Crocodile look invincible, as in genuinely, literally untouchable. But sure, a lot of other villains have beaten Luffy since then as well. Maybe they didn't quite shake Luffy up and have him literally begging to stop like Crocodile did, but still, Crocodile at this point is no longer the only villain to have beaten Luffy. However, Crocodile is also extremely competent in every other facet of being a villain, controlling all of the events of Alabasta in the palm of his hand and executing his plans to near perfection. Unlike Doflamingo, who was basically panicking from day one as all of his plans went to shit, and less than halfway through the arc, Doflamingo had to resort to his nuclear option of the birdcage. Or Kaido, who talked a big game about all of these crazy plans he had, but was ultimately unable to even move his house to a new spot before getting beat up. Crocodile really had everything together and seemed in complete control. To recap, the Straw Hats' goal was to stop the Civil War. But not only did Crocodile easily squash that dream in Rainbase, Crocodile then successfully started the Civil War, and then after the Straw Hats launched their counter-plan to fight off Baroque Works so that Vivi could get Koza to stop the war and make peace, Crocodile successfully countered that plan as well. So not only did the Vivi-Koza peace treaty fail, it actually made the war blow up even more, further playing into Crocodile's hands, with Crocodile beating Luffy again for good measure. And then when the Straw Hats realized they couldn't stop the war and switched their focus to just trying to desperately stop the bomb at the very least, turns out Crocodile even had a backup plan for that. At the end of the day, literally everything was going exactly how Crocodile planned it, no matter what the Straw Hats did. And the only thing that was actually able to end his scheme and conclude the war was Luffy finally defeating Crocodile in single combat. Note that when I'm talking about how successful other villains were, yes, plenty of other villains were successful in their backstories, like Arlong, Doflamingo, Kaido, etc., but being successful in a backstory versus being successful in the modern day narrative are two totally different things. A villain actively countering the protagonist's efforts in the present day narrative is far more important to establishing threat, as by seeing the protagonists regularly come up short over and over, as the villain repeatedly gets the better of them, that's what builds up a villain to seem insurmountable as the story goes on. Interestingly, I'd say Enel was actually the closest villain to matching Crocodile in this category, as at a certain point it seemed as though it was impossible to do anything to stop Enel from doing whatever he wanted. It's just that the moment Luffy hit Enel for the first time, pretty much all that intimidation factor around Enel immediately vanished, which in my opinion leaves Crocodile standing alone in this category of most effective, most threatening, and most competent villain. I do think Lucci also gives him a run for his money, except Lucci was more of a hired gun than the mastermind of CP9, whereas Crocodile was effective in pretty much every category. And on top of all that is the often underrated dynamic that Crocodile had with Luffy, which I think is terribly overlooked, as the hero-villain dynamic is such an important part of what makes a great villain a great villain. There is a lot of interaction between Luffy and Crocodile throughout the Alabasta arc, starting from Crocodile imprisoning Luffy to their 3 rounds of fights, which allows a lot of time for their relationship to really become pretty intensely hateful and personal. As past a certain point, defeating Crocodile wasn't just about saving Alabasta, but rather it also became a personal challenge for Luffy to prove that he had what it takes to be more than just a rookie and to challenge a great pirate of the Grand Line. Most other villains like Arlong, Doflamingo, or Enel did not really have the amount of screen time with Luffy to truly build up that extremely personal animosity. And then you've even got villains like Kaido, where the repeat encounters actually took away a lot of that animosity, as 90% of the time they were having fun. But just as important as the animosity between hero and villain, some of the greatest value you can get out of a villain is how much thematic discussion you can get out of the contrast between their beliefs and the heroes. And Luffy and Crocodile's repeat encounters allowed a lot of time for their philosophical differences to be fleshed out. Now, Luffy will always have at least some back and forth with the villain that goes to the heart of their philosophical differences. But his long-running dialogue with Crocodile over the course of Alabasta is notably more developed than he has with any other villain in the story, as Crocodile and Luffy actually have some fairly extensive discussions about the importance of friendship, camaraderie, sacrifice, and trust over the course of their many encounters. I personally feel the Luffy and Crocodile dynamic exemplifies what you really want out of a hero and villain: extremely antagonistic, extremely personal, and a well-developed contrast in ideals. And finally, what's so interesting about Crocodile is that even if he doesn't have a strong backstory like Doflamingo, he is in no way a shallow character, as his characterization throughout Alabasta and continuing even into later in the series was done in a very subtle but effective manner. If Kaido is an example of Oda repeatedly and explicitly hyping and teasing an elaborate backstory as well as numerous complex motivations for a villain only to never actually end up exploring them, Crocodile is the opposite in that his motivations are made to appear relatively simple at first, while over time a more layered and sympathetic figure is gradually implied to exist underneath. In Alabasta, we start with Crocodile seemingly supremely confident in his abilities and repeatedly mocking Luffy as a rookie with no hope of conquering the Grand Line. But by the end of the arc, he seems to be revealing his own past failures, as he explains how all rookies eventually have to give up on dreams of Pirate King as they learn about the true level of the sea, making Crocodile seem like someone with his own insecurities and history of defeat. And this in turn makes the final interaction of Luffy saying that he will become Pirate King and surpass Crocodile essentially the same as Luffy saying, "I'm not you," with Luffy also implying that the things he believes in, friendship, bonds, etc., are the differentiating factor that will allow Luffy to keep going where Crocodile failed. This little bit of dialogue that Crocodile lets slip at the end of Alabasta, revealing himself to be a failed pirate with crushed dreams, is just the start for his character. As time goes on, we continue to get lots of subtle characterization for him, with a fairly layered character taking shape without any need for a backstory. His Golden Week essentially confirms that Crocodile's dream was in fact Pirate King, he failed and had his dreams crushed. Further reinforced as he implies that he is one of the many silver medalists who fell short to Whitebeard and Roger. Recontextualizing, it definitely seems as though Crocodile sought after Pluton because his own power wasn't enough, and that when Crocodile talked down to Luffy as a rookie who knows nothing of the true level of the Grand Line, it was coming from Crocodile's own experiences and insecurities. In the same vein, the Crocodile that we see from Impel Down and Marineford onwards is now stronger and actually confident in his ability to take on the New World. He seems like a changed man, maybe even having learned a thing or two from Luffy back in Alabasta, starting with the fact that he now actually seems to even have a subordinate that he relies upon and trusts, which he used to mock Luffy for. And even more than that, looking back at his plan to unleash Pluton and go to war with the world government, looking back at his actions in Marineford where he set aside his hatred for Whitebeard to fight the world government who he hates even more, and looking at his actions now as the creator of Cross Guild and putting out bounties on Marines, we see there is another unexplored side of Crocodile that has a deep-seated hatred of the world government that could potentially be explored going forward. In general, I don't think we ever need a backstory for Crocodile. He's the perfect example of a villain in One Piece that actually seems very fleshed out purely through subtext. And Crocodile's role in the story isn't even over yet. So let's all look forward to a couple hundred chapters more of One Piece's OG villain. And if you enjoyed this video, then definitely like, comment, and subscribe, and you can support me on Patreon to get my extended thoughts on this and all future topics.